All right, Mehmet, welcome. Tell us, what is your object? What did you bring?
These are some thank you cards.
Oh, thank you cards. Okay, awesome. All right, and Wes, what about you? What did you bring?
Yeah, I brought a best dad ever mug with pictures of me and my daughter.
Oh, I've seen that one. Nice. Well, we can't wait to hear more about what you guys brought. But to the rest of you, welcome. My name is Valerie, and I am your host for this podcast, Not Quite Strangers. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect two people who don't know each other. Well, they're truly not quite strangers, but the whole idea is to make sure that we build connection, hopefully inspire some curiosity, and in some way, shape, or form, challenge the status quo. Now, if you haven't already done so, please be sure to subscribe to this podcast. You have a couple of ways to do it. You can go to the Connect to Joy YouTube channel, and that way you'll be notified anytime a new episode is posted. Or you can subscribe at notquitestrangers.com, and that way you'll get an email every time we release a new episode. And not only that, but we have some interesting connection challenges that we'll send to you every other week. So you'll have a chance to take some of these principles and apply them to your own life. So highly encourage you to do that. Now, these two gentlemen that I have here with me today are both quite special, extraordinary individuals. I've had the fortune of working with both of them in different contexts. And when I was thinking about who I wanted to talk to or who I wanted to introduce, okay, Mehmet and Wes, they have to meet. And primarily, Mehmet, you and I work together through the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute now for 3 years. It's been 3 years since I went through the Institute. In the last year and a half or so, you and I have been working more closely together. So we get to interact frequently. And you're all the way in Istanbul, Turkey. So thanks for tuning in with us. And then Wes, you and I have been working together. Actually, as an offshoot, I went through the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute with one of your colleagues, Frank Smith. And Frank introduced the two of us several years ago now, like 2 years or so. And you work with Strata Leadership. And I also been doing some work through your company. So we've had fortune of working together. And not only that, but I consider the two of you friends. We've had chances to actually connect in a personal level too. And what I thought united the two of you is both of you are in love with coaching, but also you're responsible for bringing coaching into different organizations for different reasons. And I just thought, man, the two of you not only do things in the same way or that you have the same role, but you also perhaps approach it in different ways or for different reasons. And so welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Valerie. It's great to be here and great to be with Mehmet.
Yes. Now I wanted to ask you, thank you. Wanted to ask you both before you go into the object that you brought, what had you say yes to being on this podcast? Like, or even I gave you so little information about who you would be meeting and what this was going to be about. What had you say yes?
Yeah, I think for me, Valerie, you're a role model for me. And so anything that you're engaged with, I want to be a part of. And so anytime you say yes, I know you have such a generous spirit. And so you're a person that's easy to say yes to. And then secondly, I love the spirit of this podcast. So just the idea of what unites us and what connects us. And I resonate a lot with Will Rogers. So I'm from Oklahoma, and Will Rogers is a legend here. And he's famous for saying he never met a person he didn't like. And I kind of feel that same way. And so anytime I have the opportunity to meet somebody else, especially from a different backgrounds, I think I'm going to say yes to that.
Nice. Saying yes. Mehmet, what about for you?
Say yes to life. That's becoming my new value. Say yes to life. And just like Wes, how can I say no to you? We've known each other for about 3 years now, and I just love being with you, hanging out. And this is, I exchanged a couple of emails with Wes, and even from the email, I got very interested in getting to know them. And that's why I said yes. Say yes to life.
Say yes to life. Both of you have that value. Say yes. So speaking of saying yes, I asked each of you to bring an object, right? Which you shared. You kind of gave us a little teaser. So I'm curious, Mehmet, we'll start with you. You have this bunch of greeting cards, it looks like. So what are those and why did you think they represented you?
So these are thank you cards from college students from Loras College, which is a very small college in Dubuque, Iowa. And how do I know these college students from Dubuque, Iowa in the last 3 years, except this year because of the pandemic? But prior to that, for 3 years, around January, my friend Rich Clayton, who sits at the board of Loras College, brings students, about 15 seniors, to the Bay Area and takes them through Silicon Valley companies, and they meet people from all kinds of different roles. And it's almost this mentorship. So one day I told Rich, I said, would you like me to work with them, bring them to UC Berkeley? I can teach them a little bit about leadership, maybe communication skills. We can do some storytelling. And they loved it. Every single year they came. And after the event, I got these 15 handwritten thank you cards. And they're just beautiful notes in them. So there are days, not every single workshop is good. Not every single coaching session is good. Some days it's actually pretty bad, after even 6 years. And you start having those questions in your mind. Am I a good instructor? Am I a good coach? All the imposter syndrome, boom, falls on you. And those like this, I come to this box, I pick one just randomly and read, and most of them are really nice. Almost this, some of them said, this changed my life. So I'm like, oh, wow, I had that impact on this person. All right, keep moving on, man. Keep learning. You're good. Don't worry about that workshop. What did you learn from it? Let's move on. So yeah, I keep it pretty close to bring my mood up on days like those.
Sounds like this really just a nice reminder that what you bring has value, that you are serving people and they need what you have to offer. Wow. I should ask people for thank you cards. I don't send cards, so I don't really get cards very often, but that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Wes, what about you? You have this best dad mug.
Yeah, so I have this best dad ever mug, and it's pictures of my daughter and I, and there's actually another one up on the shelf behind me. And my wife surprised me. So my daughter just turned 2 in February. So this upcoming June will be my 3rd Father's Day. But for the first 2 Father's Day, my wife has given me the same mug with pictures of my daughter. And so you asked us to kind of bring an object that exemplified our work in coaching or leadership development. And for me, and I've actually said this explicitly a few times when I've been training leaders, I'm very aware that the leaders that I'm training, the leaders that I'm working with, may be my daughter's boss someday. And maybe, maybe my kids are going to be influenced. I hope my kids will be influenced and have a really rich and human experience in the workplace in the future because of the work that I get to do working with leaders to try to make work more human, more loving, more empathetic, more focused on what it actually means to be a human being and what it actually means to work and contribute and where does our self-worth come from and all these kind of big kind of existential questions that I try to bring into my work in leadership development.
That's so interesting. I don't think I'm sure you've said this to me before in some way, shape, or form, but really just now got that the work that we all do, like the 3 of us and those of us that are our peers, is really for the next generation to have a better experience. And sometimes I can get very focused on the individual that I'm speaking to or the audience that I have in front of me. But what we're really doing is creating an opportunity for them to serve other people that we may never meet, right? People who may not even be born yet in some cases, right? Or very young, to your point, Wes. That's fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about this work that you both do. Now, from what I know about 2 of you is, coaching was not necessarily that was not the focus from the outset, as you were working through your education. So what is it that drew you to becoming a coach, and why is it so important to you now?
Yeah, great question. Mehmet's giving me the eyes to go forward. For me, I actually began my career journey. My undergraduate degree was in ministry and theology, and I wanted to. I thought I was going to be a pastor for the rest of my life, and then I worked at a church for a couple of years, and said, nope, not for me, and transitioned into the world of business and kind of floundered for a few years. And then actually worked with a career coach who pointed me towards industrial and organizational psychology, which wasn't on my radar at all. And as my wife and I were driving home from that meeting with the career coach, my wife was reading to me about what IO psychologists do. And it was just this light bulb moment for both of us of that's everything I've ever wanted to do with my life. And I had no idea that you could get paid to do that. And so then through that journey, I had some pretty painful failings as a leader very early in my career where I was placed in leadership positions. And I failed and I struggled and I dealt with, depression and restless nights to the point that with one job, I actually asked for my old job back and just said, this leadership stuff isn't for me. Can I go back to just being an individual contributor? And that was really painful for me as somebody who has always seen myself as a leader. And working through my pain and kind of the grief and loss of that situation, I just came to see that it wasn't so much that I failed, but that I wasn't set up for success. I didn't have leaders who were mentors or coaches or people around me who were cheering me on. And in a lot of ways, whenever I'm working with a leader, I almost feel like I'm working with my 24-year-old self and just saying, you're doing a good job. This leadership thing is really tricky. Just stick the course and don't be so hard on yourself and live true to your values. And so for me, this journey into the world of coaching has been sort of accidental, but also the marks have been there all along. So it feels really natural.
Yeah. It's a natural fit. I would say I struggle with some of the same things. As strong a leader as I am, I don't necessarily like managing other people. Yeah. I don't. And I remember when I worked for Hyatt, my boss called me and asked me, I was in the regional learning team. And he said, Valerie, would you like to be the lead regional director? And I was like, sure. And I know he was like, are you sure? It was a promotion. I was going to be responsible for the learning team. He was a director and he needed a number two. But the thought of having to lead other people, I was like, it was daunting. I love being an individual contributor. I love ideating. I love connecting with people. I love developing people. But it was the administrative stuff that I just knew that was just not for me. And I'd done it in other, parts of my life before. So yeah, I did okay. I think I started to learn how to leverage others' strengths even more. I think that's what I've been challenging myself as a leader is to really okay, if that's not my gift to manage the administrative portion, who can I partner with that's really gifted at that, right? Yeah. And now being able to leverage my greatest gifts with their greatest gifts. That's been kind of my homework assignment. But yeah, because I couldn't keep turning down opportunities to lead just because I'm like, do I have to do paperwork?
Right. Yeah. No, I really want to hear what Mehmet has to say. And there's a lot there that I'm sure we'll come back to later. But I really love the idea that leadership is a burden, and it's been kind of glamorized and almost made to be sexy in the Western world. Like it's this pinnacle or this crown that you wear as if you're somehow more worthy or more special than other people, or you've arrived or succeeded in life because you're a leader. But if you actually look at what leadership is, it's a burden, and it's selfless, and it's not about you. And so, yeah, no, it's definitely not for everyone, and something that maybe even should be avoided unless you just can't avoid it. So I don't know. But
I want to hear what Mehmet has to say too, but I would add to this that maybe the leadership is not the label. I think for me is more like management, right? The management of tasks and activities is part that's like, I think all of us can be leaders in unique ways. But Mehmet, what would you bring to this? What are you bringing to the party, Mehmet?
Well, it was 100% accidental, just like Wes's example. I was just drawn to a person, Dr. Mark Rittenberg, our founder at the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute. Just by luck, I was invited to one of his workshops 8 years ago in September 2013, almost 8 years ago. And I still remember the first words Mark said in that workshop. He said, "Why are you occupying that seat?" I'm like, what? And he repeated, "Why are you occupying that seat? You're not happy with your job. You're complaining all the time. You're not quitting. So why are you occupying that seat? There are people out there who would really like to get that position." And I thought he was talking to me. Prior to BECI, I was in finance, business intelligence, data analytics. It wasn't me. I remember those 13 years. The only time I was happy is when I did end user training. So when I trained users with the new functionalities that we were introducing, that was the human interaction. So that's the thing I loved. So after Mark said those words, I'm like, wow, does he know me? Is he talking to me? And then after that workshop, I just started following him. He teaches at UC Berkeley. So I started showing up at his weekend classes for 2 years. I'm not even kidding you. I think I attended every single class Mark taught. Later on, I started going to his house to clean up his inbox, fixing his printer. And then all of a sudden, they started hiring me for part-time jobs, some facilitation. I got trained to be a facilitator. And then I heard about this 10-day executive coaching certificate program. And of course, I had to do it. And then boom. So I think Mark, I'm going to share this quote from Rumi. I always share it in our workshops too. Rumi, scholar, poet, lived in Turkey 800 years ago. He said, "You were born with wings. Why crawl through life?" You were born with wings. Why crawl through life? Mark was the person that reminded me that I have wings. I don't need to crawl. And that's what coaching is all about. Really reminding people they have wings. Don't crawl and start flying. So that really resonated with me after I learned the skills. My first client was my brother, who's actually here visiting me here today. And in one of our sessions, he's been trying to he's a doctor, and in Turkey, we have different levels of doctor. He's trying to become an assistant professor. In our first session, I said, I don't believe you. I don't think you want to become an assistant professor. And his face is like, what are you talking about? I've been trying to become an assistant professor for over 15 years. I said, I don't see it, man, like the way you communicate. So, and boom, it changed the whole session, and he started studying more, and he is on his way to become one. He hasn't become one yet, but it's all about the other person. It's all about helping other people, and that really makes me happy. That's what drew me to coaching.
So I thought you were going to say, because you now shown the light into your brother's lack of passion, that he was like, "You're right, I actually want to be a musician," or something. But it sounds like your coaching actually had him double down on something that he really wanted, but just wasn't going about it in a way that worked. Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. That was good. That was good.
Maybe not a musician, but if he had the chance, if he wasn't married and had 2 kids, I think he would become a sailor and travel around the world, because that's what he does when he comes over. We watch YouTube videos of people who are sailing around the world, and just like, oh, what would life be like if we are both sailors. So yeah, not a musician, but a sailor. I'm 100% sure.
Huh. Yeah, I'm even more surprised. And I don't even know your brother. Wes, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say I just met Mehmet within the last hour, but I can already tell that he's a fantastic coach, because one, working with your brother or somebody that close to you is super difficult. But two, for him to be able to challenge his brother and speak his intuition as boldly as he did, and for his brother to come back and say, no, actually, I really do want to do this. And the idea that Mehmet is able, with his brother of all people, to carve out this space of safety that's non-judgmental, where we can lay everything out on the table and deal with it honestly and openly. I think I can already tell that Mehmet is a fantastic coach.
Yay. I would agree with that sentiment for both of you, actually. And I'm really curious, both of you have kind of highlighted some of the things that you were challenged by in your pursuit of being a coach, or even in your experience of coaching now. So I'm curious, say more about what's challenging to you about coaching. I know that right now, even in my own work, there are times when I'm just like, oh, I don't know if coaching is really what I want to do. I love having conversations. I love asking questions, but I don't always know that this is the vehicle that I also want to stay in for a long time. Maybe I want to be a sailor too. I don't know. Maybe not. No, I'm not. But I'm just curious about what are you challenged by in relation to this work in coaching? Mehmet, let's start with you.
I'm trying to come up with a good example. What is challenging for me in coaching? One thing I can say is my curiosity sometimes can be distracting. In coaching sessions, we want to get our coachee to the next level, get to a baby step, move forward. But sometimes I'm just fascinated with people's stories. I just want to dig deeper and ask me, tell me more. But then, and I'm looking at my watch, I'm like, man, I have only 15 minutes left. We haven't covered any kind of options. I'm still in the reality. So sometimes I spend a little bit too much time on that part, digging deeper on the stories. That could be a challenge sometimes, I think.
Sounds like you should have a podcast.
Yeah.
That scratches my itch about being curious.
Yeah.
Wes, what about for you?
Yeah, this is a heavy question for me. I think that the hardest or most challenging thing for me is that I primarily work as a leadership or executive coach. And so oftentimes I'm hired by the organization to come in and coach an individual. So it's the organization that's actually making the commitment, spending money, developing this person. But I made a decision early in my coaching career that I would not coach for compliance. So I wouldn't coach the person just to fit within whatever bubble or just focus on performance. And so I really take a holistic approach to coaching the whole person and trying to activate what is their actual vision for their life, what's important to them, what do they value. But the challenging thing about that is I think that we have been so convinced by organizations and how organizations typically function, where individuals are often feel like they're cogs in a machine and kind of go to your corner and do your role and do this, that oftentimes in trying to help them activate their vision, asking questions about what do you really want? There's so much kind of fear and years of conditioning that have been layered on that really make it difficult for people to think that way. And and there's almost this kind of fear of, I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to think about, so for Mehmet's brother, maybe he really does want to sail around the world. And maybe that vision actually causes him pain or is scary to him because he feels that that's not attainable, or he feels like that life is not actually as accessible to him. And so why get your hopes up only to be, have those stifled and have those dreams not even be attainable to you. And so really even pulling people into this space of dreaming and not limiting themselves, but really being expansive with what could be possible for your life. I find that to be incredibly challenging when I'm working with leaders in organizations. And I don't know if it's the same way in all parts of the world, but specifically in kind of our US capitalistic setting, it's a dangerous conversation to have. It really is.
Oh, dangerous.
Yeah.
Mama, I noticed you nodding your head. What's going through your mind? And you can stay unmuted. Unless you have a lot of craziness going on. This is very organic. Yeah.
It wasn't exactly, I am just overall fascinated with Wes's presence and his energy. And now I'm just nodding because hearing his voice, agreeing with the things he's saying, but I was just thinking, Valerie did a really good job at dispatch. Honestly, I wasn't nodding. I wasn't nodding. He got me here. I wasn't nodding with exactly what he was saying, but I'm like, what a fascinating person with a lot of positive, good energy.
But what made you think that? This is great. I love it. What made you think that, Mehmet?
we teach leadership communications.
Yeah.
And, you run into these geniuses and most of the Silicon Valley engineer types who are amazing analytical minds, coming up with these robotic solutions, machine learning, big data. And when I first started teaching at UC Berkeley, I'm like, what am I going to teach to these people?
Mm.
And then the minute they open their mouths, you're like, oh, there's a lot of things I can actually help them. So just seeing Wes's communication skills is his energy, his voice, his tonality. That's what I'm fascinated with. I think overall a really nice person.
See, he doesn't have anything to teach you, Wes. It's like, all right, check. Okay, so I'm curious. This question just popped in my head because of what Mehmet you just said. But I'm curious about how are you guys, knowing that I was picking you out of nowhere to introduce you to each other, like what is the mental process? Like what are the check boxes that you have about whether or not this is going to be an interesting conversation or this is an interesting person? If you wouldn't mind sharing some of that. Wes, what about you? What's the criteria for making, like, what did you size? How are you sizing Mehmet up right now?
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know that I even come to the conversation with that framework in mind. I think one of the privileges of my life is getting to do training and speaking with leaders constantly. And so I'm just in meetings constantly, meeting new people after new people after new people. And I really have come to see that I'm just curious. And so I feel like Mehmet has something to offer me that I can leave today and my life will be better because I've met Mehmet and he's challenged some way of thinking, whether he did that directly through actually saying something or challenging me directly, or just indirectly through me observing him and going, that's interesting. I would like to have more of that in my life. Like Valerie, for you, for instance, your just kind of natural spontaneity. And I remember I asked you when you and I were first meeting, I asked you, hey, you made this decision to kind of leave this corporate job, very secure with Hyatt, and go out on your own and start your own company. And I was like, I kind of asked in a roundabout way, how do you make ends meet? Or do you ever worry about, where the next dollar is coming from? And you were just like, your facial expressions told me that really wasn't even a question that you would even think of in that way. And so then that's a signal to me of, oh, I've been wired to think this way. And maybe this way of thinking is not natural or isn't serving me. And so, probably don't even remember that, but that has continued to challenge me a year and a half later. And so I think Mehmet, just his calmness. And I know that Mehmet is I can tell that he's a very smart guy and a big deal, respectively. And he doesn't seem to need to personify or force the issue on that. So I've already learned so much just from his presence.
What's your response?
It was automatic. The heart, whenever somebody says you're smart, that heart goes up. I didn't even have to do anything. I just programmed it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Wes. I appreciate your comments. So the question was, what would be a successful, what was the question?
No, I was really just because of what you said. You weren't even nodding about what Wes was talking about, but you were kind of like, okay, this guy's pretty good. This is pretty cool. Like I could get to know this person. And I just wanted to zoom out for a second because a big part of me putting people together is that I use my intuition. There's very few, I don't have like, okay, I need this person with this background or, oh, I need 2 coaches. It wasn't that at all, but I've had independent conversations with both of you and both of you are kind-hearted, generous, authentic, vulnerable, professional, intelligent, like, so those all matched up, right? And I also knew that the conversation, you have such similarities, but yet are so different, and I can't even put my finger on the differences. I mean, obviously the cultural difference, Turkey and Oklahoma, quite different in that, from that perspective. But I also knew that there would be some level of enrichment. And I love hearing that you guys can see it too. That's basically it. So I'm just kind of exploring, like, what is it that you see? Because I saw something, but I can't always articulate it as well. And it doesn't always land the same way for you, right? As it maybe from me on the outside.
Mhm.
So that's all. I was just wondering about, like, what made this a good match?
Mhm.
Anything else?
What would make this even a better match would be Wes sharing some stories about his daughter, because fingers crossed, in about 4.5, 5 months, I am becoming one. So I would love to hear some stories, maybe some tips. Maybe we can meet after this. But yeah, I would be very curious to hear. I have no idea what I'm getting myself into.
Mehmet is a first-time father. Yes. Woohoo,
Yeah,
congrats.
congratulations, Mehmet.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome. Yeah.
Maybe you have
Yeah,
some
gosh. That's we could spend hours and hours and hours just talking about fatherhood. For me, whenever I was younger, I didn't really have big dreams to be an astronaut or a firefighter. I just remember at a young age, I wanted to be a dad, and I think that was maybe something kind of weird about me. Maybe it was the byproduct of having 3 younger sisters. I don't know, but and so when my daughter came 2 years ago, and even before that, really, when my wife told me she was pregnant, I mean, it was a powerful before and after moment of just life changing and identity, and life really opening up to me in ways that it hadn't opened up to me previously. And just my capacity for love exploded. And yeah, so that's been super fun. I actually just read Matthew McConaughey's memoir, Green Lights, and he says, he said something to the effect of, when your firstborn is born, write everything down that you feel in that moment, because he said you'll never have clarity of life like you do when your firstborn is born. And I actually really resonate with and agree with that. I think that when my daughter was born, it was like I knew what mattered in life and what didn't really matter. And now, even as 2 years have gone by, I've fallen back into some bad habits and kind of lost some of the clarity that I had in that moment. So I would encourage you in that way, just whatever clarity and insights you're getting during the season. I think for me, one of the, and Valerie, you actually talk about this a lot as a coach. You can only show up to your clients and if you're showing up for yourself, essentially. So you have to kind of model health in your own life. And if you're not modeling health in your own life, you're not going to be effective as a coach. And man, is that true in parenting. So my daughter is 2, and she's starting to become pretty explosive and demonstrative with her emotions, which, if you know anything about how emotions develop, her limbic system is fully developed, and her prefrontal cortex, which regulates those emotions, is not even close to being formed fully. And so her emotions are not logical, and they're very big and very powerful. And I came from a background where I don't necessarily healthfully experience, express, or regulate my own emotions. I'm kind of an emotional stuffer. And so when she responds that way, my initial reaction is, no, emotions are bad. Let's cap it. Let's put a lid on it. Let's logic our way out of this feeling. And that goes against all parenting advice of raising an emotionally intelligent child. So I'm finding right now in this season of my life, I'm working with a therapist, and I'm having to really work through how to healthfully express myself and be comfortable with my emotions, so that I can tap into my empathy with my daughter and be vulnerable in those emotions with her and create safe space for her to feel. So it's, goodness gracious, if you ever wanted a list of things to work on about yourself, have a child, and you'll see all of your flaws instantly and painfully and powerfully.
I I so appreciate you saying that. I'm an only daughter, right? And my parent, we had to the logic ourselves out of every conversation kind of moment, only girl, 3 brothers. My dad was in the military, mom was a school teacher. So all very no nonsense, get it done kind of energy. And I didn't realize this. So what you're doing for your daughter is so helpful, because I've been a person that really controlled my emotions from very early on.
Yeah.
You know, I knew my dad had a quite a temper and very expressive. So I realized that, okay, getting angry doesn't win. You know, you don't win with that. So don't do what dad does. So anger out.
Yeah.
And then if I cried because I was sad or upset or oh, it's not fair, and I would get like, there would be consequences for expressing sadness. I'm like, okay, crying's not safe. You know, crying
Right.
is, you know, is also bad. So imagine two huge emotions that I was like, dial it down.
Yeah.
It was horrible. I had back pain for years. And I learned that a lot of it was just all the tension and emotional tension I had. So I thank God for my ex-husband who helped me process emotion, because he was so emotionally expressive that it would annoy the heck out of me. I'm like, dude, like get a grip. Like, what's your problem? But just like you said about your children being your teachers, I think we attract to ourselves who is there to teach us. And in my case, my ex-husband was that person that allowed me to see that, oh, actually expressing emotion is healthy and it's a good thing to do. And I didn't really work on that until after we divorced. So, but thanks for the tips, right?
Yeah. So my daughter is 2 and I'm 31, and we're both working off of the same material for emotions of what color are you feeling in this moment? I'm feeling blue, you know, like it's
Yeah.
a very humbling experience, but really powerful as well.
So
So Mehmet, do you know the gender of your baby, or are you waiting to find out?
It's a boy.
A boy. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
So what's been the experience of you know, becoming a father? What's that experience been like for you?
Couple of things that comes to my mind right away is I started crying on watching movies from the 70s, Turkish movies,
Hmm.
which are very emotional, but I would never cry, I guess.
Hmm.
I'm becoming a little bit more emotional these days.
Yeah.
And I think there's something special going on in our relationship too with my wife. I've been supporting her more. My empathy levels, I wrote to myself to work on my empathy levels, because, you know, working from home, it's been a year, we've been together. Together in this house 24/7. So, you know, things can get interesting. So what happened last week, Valerie knows this. We have an exercise called Giving Myself an A, where you write yourself a letter from a year from today, and you write about your accomplishments as if they already happened. It's not like, I wish by March 12th, 2022, I will be, you know, taking my daughter out or son out for walks. I'm calling my parents twice a week now. It's not like that. It's already, I'm calling them. So it's not hopes and dreams. It's already happening. So I'm writing things about my future son. He is now 7 months old. He's healthy. And then as I'm writing the letter, my wife walks in and she says, I finally felt him. She hasn't felt the baby, you know, and the doctor said, don't worry, it's probably going to be around week 18, 20, and she's about 16, 17 right now. As I was writing the letter, she felt it. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's crazy, you know? So all these spirituality or emotions are, I think, increasing in our lives. And my wife is also a Reiki master. So she's also, I think more of that happening in our household these days.
Ooh, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
It almost sounds, I don't know this to be true, but it almost sounds like what you wrote made it so real that it shifted the energy also.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I do find that things like that are not coincidences. And so that's so beautiful.
And I just want to add, I love what Wes said about, you know, writing your emotions, clarity in the early days. I was planning to do that. I already wrote one letter to him already, and it was so interesting. You know, I'm like, what do I write to someone who is not even born? And I want to do it more, and I want to continue it after he's born.
Mehmet, that blows my mind. Valerie, you are like a master connector, because I've been writing letters to my daughter ever since she was in the womb as well. And so
Wow.
I don't think that's a very common thing. So it's pretty fascinating that both you and I have engaged in that practice.
And what do you do with the letters, Wes?
Yeah, so for me, I just, so I'm a writer. That's how I really process the world, how I make sense of things. I'm a very internal processor, and I don't know what I'm thinking most of the time, maybe because my emotions are not as available to me. But through writing, that really comes out. So I just started writing to her before we knew it was a her. And so the early letters just say baby. And so then about midway through, I was thinking, when am I going to give these to her? So my plan is for her and for all my future kids that when they turn 18, that I would actually bind it in a book and actually give it to them when they turn 18. So yeah, I think having Mehmet, I don't know if you feel the same way, but having a baby also makes you feel more fragile or vulnerable in ways that I had not previously felt. So I wasn't somebody who really ever thought about death before my wife became pregnant. And then I started driving safer. Because now there's this little baby that's dependent on me, and I play such an important role in her life. That part of my reason for writing as well is, you know, you never know what's going to happen, and God forbid it. But if I were to get taken from this earth early, I would want her to have that piece of her father. So I always write with that perspective in mind as well.
Oof, that's wow.
Yeah, sorry to bring up death on the podcast. That feels like a total.
Look, no worry. Death is as much a part of living as creating is. So no, this is wonderful, and I love that both of you are doing that, taking that initiative. Well, I mean, if it's a different generation too, right? I don't know. How about like when you contrast who your parents were to you and how you related to them versus how you're hoping and working on relating to your kids? What's different? Yeah.
I remember actually my mom had this diary, and like there's a piece of my hair in that diary as well. Very cute. My dad was a typical Middle Eastern dad. And in the early, 60s, 70s, Turkish fathers didn't show a lot of emotions for their kids. I mean, till I left home when I was 18, I wasn't sure about my father's emotions. He didn't show them much. He actually showed a little bit too much on the anger side. And I'm like, oh, wow, he actually has a pretty soft heart as soon as I left for college. And these days it's all about, oh my God, how much I miss you. I love you so much. I'm like, wow, Dad, what was going on in your mind when I was like 12 years old? He showed his love in a different way. Like I said, I sailed. And I would go outside of our hometown for competitions, and he would drive 15 hours straight without sleeping and come and see me. I think that's how he showed his love to me. And now he's showing his love the same way, a more affectionate way. It's my style too, more affectionate way. But yeah, when I was growing up, it was a little bit different. And I know we shared some dad stories before, Valerie, so I think there's some commonality there.
I totally get that. Yeah, my dad's changed quite a bit now. He's 76 now, 77, 76. So yeah, what's fascinating, I didn't have the benefit of a dad who wanted to write letters when I was in utero or any of that. But what we are doing now as a family is he's really committed to all of us getting to know each other better. And so we started doing this thing I call it getting to know you in 20. So I source questions from the family, uncles, aunts, nephews, nieces, brothers, everybody. And then I interviewed my dad with 20 questions. So I basically get 20 questions and I interview him on video. And I ask them the questions and then I share it with the family. So he was the first person that went. And now he nominated his younger sister to do it. And now his younger sister nominated my brother. So it's like going around the family, and I interview them like this. And he said things. I mean, there were questions from like, how did you, get to the career? He was in the military. So how did you get into that? To questions like, what do you want us to know about you that we've never asked, or something like that? And the stuff that he shares now, I was like, man, I was brought to tears like 3 times in the interview. It's only an hour long, just because there are things that he never said out loud to us before. And I'm like, man, if we'd only known that, what would our relationship have been like? But it's never too late. It's never too late. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mehmet. Wes, what about for you? When you think about your relationship with your parents, and how's that affecting or impacting who you are as a father?
Yeah. And my parents were as present, I would say, as any parents could be that I know of. So my dad coached all my sports teams. My mom was very engaged with my schoolwork, had grandparents that attended all of my sporting contests. And I think that for both of my parents, that idea of just expressing emotion. So one of the legacies, I think that my parents expressed emotions more healthfully than maybe their parents did. And so I feel like that legacy in our family. And also, kind of to Mehmet's point, I think that our culture just around emotions and dads and their roles in their kids' lives is changing. And I would say for the better. And so it's not on the mom to be the sole source of nurture and warmth and compassion and empathy. That's a co-parenting role now that I think is a really healthy shift. So yeah, I think that that's the biggest thing, is just, I think that for both of my parents, my mom had a father who was an alcoholic. And if you ever read about children of alcoholic parents, they learn safety survival skills from a young age to kind of suppress and withdraw some from maybe engaging with all of their emotions, because there's a lot of pain and trauma there. And so my mom's done an incredible job, and to watch of working through that over the years, and to watch her engage with my daughter, it's actually instances like that I love. Why I love the work that I do is because coaching inherently says, if you can imagine the person you want to be, if you can imagine the parent, the employee, the man, the woman, whatever it is, if you can imagine that person, you can become that person, regardless of what your background holds, regardless of your personality type. All of those things are rendered moot when you have a vision of who you would like to be. So to watch my mom engage with my daughter now is really encouraging to see that she's become more emotionally expressive throughout her life. So
if you can see it, you can be it.
Yeah, for sure.
Good idea. That's really interesting. Well, you kind of teed this up a little bit, Wes, but I'm now curious. We talked about both of you and your roles as coaches, right, in your own career, but then also it sounds like you've developed your development, and you're developing the skills that you want to embody for your children. I'm curious about you as spouses, as husbands. What's that been like? What's the impact of this development that you now have been focused on for yourself? What's the impact on how you show up as husbands?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marriage therapy here. I was going to share this episode with my parents and with my wife, but now I'm having second thoughts. No, Matt, why don't you?
I'll tell you a story from 2010. And, I think the question is how this development, our coaching, our experience. Okay, great.
Yeah.
2010, June 19, 2010, we got married in Istanbul, Turkey. And I wanted to wait for about 2 weeks for my wife to get her visa, her, change of her last name, all this paperwork to settle. And then we came to US, I believe early July 2010. And I'm expecting my wife to take care of everything because that's what I did. I took care of it. And, she was a little bit more dependent on me. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you just need my help? Great. So I would make lists for her with, these check boxes. So when she's done, she can check. And personality-wise, I'm not 100% extrovert. She made me do this test. I am kind of between, probably leaning towards extrovert a little bit more, but I also love my silent, quiet, alone times. But she is 100% introvert. So imagine getting a list from your husband, which includes, you gotta go out, meet people. You gotta go to this networking event. There's this thing going on at San Francisco State. I think that master's program is the right fit for you. So go and talk to the professor, go and talk to the admissions office. So like lists like that, and it was really frustrating for her because it's not her. And it would be frustrating for me because she would never do those. So I'm like, I'm giving you the answers, the solution. What to do. And later on, I found out that all I needed to do was just to listen and show some empathy. And as in the coaching world, we say, play back with empathy. Oh my God, that must be really hard. How can I support you? And I still struggle with that, but I am way better compared to, almost 11 years ago, giving her the lists.
Go meet people.
Yeah, go meet people, make some new friends. And that's like the last thing she wants to do.
Yeah.
I can't wait to meet. I don't think I've met Mehmet, right? I don't think I have. No. Well, tell her I said hi. I'm sure she'll watch this episode. If she does, I empathize with you. Wes, is there anything that you're willing to share that would not put you in the doghouse or diminish you in the eyes of your parents?
Yeah, no, definitely. My answer is actually really similar to Mehmet. So my kind of strongest influence as a coach is probably the folks over at Coactive Coach Training Institute, and there's a Coactive book. But they have this statement, which I think, all different schools of coaching thought kind of agree with this statement in different ways. But they say in coaching, the person you're coaching, you want to view them as naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So they're not a problem to be solved. They're not somebody to be fixed. They're not what Mehmet's saying. They're not somebody who need, if you don't enter into their life and give them this knowledge or advice, that their life is going to be ruined, that they actually have all of the resources and creativity and wisdom to be able to solve all of their own problems. And so my job is not to solve their problems for them. And that's actually a super liberating role, and one that I love about coaching, because my default is to be kind of the expert or the advisor that people come to for life advice. And that kind of fills my ego, but it also is this burden and pressure that I carry. And in coaching, I get to let all of that go and just say, this person is capable. My job is just to believe in them, to challenge them, to help them create a vision for their life, to hold them accountable to living to their values and taking action on the things that are important to them. My job actually isn't to come in and solve them. And actually, if I try to solve them, I'm actually going to damage them and cause more harm than good. So the reason I say that in the context of my wife is, when my wife and I went through premarital counseling, the biggest thing that kept coming up was that I wanted to fix her. I saw all of these things and, oh, if you would just do it this way, or if you just think about it this way. And so I still struggle with that. We've been married for almost 8 years, and I still struggle with that as kind of my default mode of thought. And so my wife will catch on. So when I'm coaching her, and she'll actually tell me not to coach her. So I have to be really subtle with how I go about it. But just that shift, and I think the approach of a coach is an approach I try to take to all areas of my life, that the people that I'm interacting with are not problems to be solved, and I'm not their savior swooping in to fix their life or solve their problems. I'm just there to celebrate what's naturally unique about them and creative and beautiful. And so really trying to tap into that mindset with my wife all of the time, that my wife is capable and she's whole, and things that I already believe about her anyways. But for whatever reason, my default mode of being in relationship with other people is to be the solver or the fixer. But kind of to Mehmet's point, and actually there's some interesting research coming out around trauma and victims of trauma, that the number one indicator of being able to overcome trauma is having an empathetic witness. Somebody,
an empathetic witness, you said?
An empathetic witness. Somebody that you can speak your trauma to and that they just listen and empathize. Yeah. And that's it. There's, and so actually the path to healing is just having somebody who empathizes with you and loves you and it isn't trying to fix your problems, isn't trying to reverse the effects of trauma or whatever. It's just to be and love and let the other person be and feel loved. And so it's a journey. That's part of the reason I love my work is I think it does make me a better husband. And that's really important to me.
Such a great insight. I mean, I'm not sure at what point the conversation shifted into such personal matters, but I think I love the idea that, who both of you are in your careers and what you do for work is also aligned so beautifully with who you are as people, what you do in your lives, the people that you care for the most, get to experience and benefit, from this this career path that you've chosen. I got to say, as a coach, I've also, met, similar to you, Wes, that I've had the instinct to want to fix things, fix people, and I've gotten better and better the more years I spend in this profession. I don't want the responsibility. I don't want to have to own somebody's, hey, but you told me, that kind of thing. But so now when I catch myself, I'm like, do you want me to listen as a coach, or you just want me to you just want to vent? Like, I give people an option, because not only does it give them an option, but it also reminds me that I have to choose how I'm going to interact, right? And I can give up listening for, okay, I need to figure something out for this. And like, no, I can just be in the conversation, right? And I do have my 15-year-old niece is very adept at calling me out when I'm doing it. So I'll ask her a question. She's like, Tia, Valerie, are you life coaching me right now? And I'm like, guilty as charged. I'm done. Nope, I don't care that much. So what do you want to share? And I like, she's helping me like give it up faster. Like, oh, okay. Yeah, you don't need this from me. You really just need somebody to vent to. Got it. So that's beautiful. I want to zoom out of our conversation right now. And I know, look, I clearly see that there's so much more to talk about. There's so much more that you two can share with one another. And I would encourage you to follow up with each other after this. But I want to know, what has it been like in this experiment, I'm going to call it this, or laboratory of a podcast, where you get to meet someone from from nothing and create this kind of environment? What's it been like for you guys? Yeah. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah.
Wes is always nice. He always says, Mehmet, you go first. So I apologize. I interrupted you. I thought you already started, but why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, well, one, I'm left wanting. So I want to know so much more about Mehmet. And so my curiosity is just at an all-time high. And I'm thinking, I wish we would have had more time and so we'll have to connect and talk later. I think it's pretty cool just to have another point of reference of a dad who is really passionate about making fatherhood kind of the center point of his life and the thing that he's really feeling fully invested in and engaged in. And so unlike Mehmet, I've only lived in Oklahoma my whole life in about a 30-mile radius. And so I feel like that stifles me culturally sometimes, but to have the opportunity to meet with someone who's, lives in Turkey and has done work in California, and to see that there's so much that's similar about us, or that we have in common, similar ways of thinking, despite maybe our different backgrounds, is really, really, really cool.
That's awesome. What about you, Mehmet?
Mark, our founder, Mark Rittenberg, always says human story is never boring. I think it's just another example of this conversation, not just from Wes, beautiful stories. I also, heard from you during this conversation, Valerie. When I first saw that on the left corner recording live on Facebook, I'm like, oh, we are live. So I gotta be a little bit maybe more careful. But then I totally forget about it. It felt so natural. I wrote down like this thing on show up for yourself first. I never heard about it. So what Wes shared, we always show up and choose to be present. But you got to show up. You got to show up for yourself first. So I love this session. I learned so much. And what a great way to spend my Friday night with you. I appreciate it. And to Wes's point, time to go out of Oklahoma, man. Come and visit me in Istanbul. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Look at that.
Very generous of you. And if it feels a little awkward and hollow for somebody who's lived in Turkey and been to California, but if for whatever reason you want to come to Oklahoma, there's not much to see. You've got a friend here.
Did I hear Valerie right? Do you work with Frank?
I did work with Frank. Yep.
Oh, not anymore. Not now.
Anymore, but we did work together previously. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can also visit Frank when I visit you. Yeah,
Yes.
That would be great.
Absolutely. There's a lot of threads. I had a conversation in the last episode, actually, with Ingrid Gafshon, with Mehmet, you know her, and a gentleman that I met in a ride share. The both of them are documentary filmmakers, though, and they had such an awesome conversation. And one of the things that really stood out and Ingrid shared was that this idea that we all have these connecting threads between us, right? They're not always that evident. They're not on the surface typically, right? So we might look different on the outside, like, the color or the location, right? Geography, the gender, like there's all these elements that we on the outside won't be able to see. What she pointed to is there's these threads between all these people. And one of the things that really spoke to me when she identified that was that my role is to actually take those threads, bring them together and create a tapestry. And so that's, and she said that so beautifully. I'm like, yes, that's it. That's exactly it. And I know that every single person that's listening to this probably has discovered some thread to something that the two of you said, because you said it from your heart, right? There are so many things that you shared that was straight from the heart, that were very authentic and vulnerable about who you are as people and your experience as fathers, as husbands, as professionals, as, sons, all of those. And I'm sure they now have found a thread to connect to. So bring your threads together. Let's do that. And I'm curious, now that you mentioned, you don't have to go into it now, but I'm curious, what questions are you left with after this interaction, things or topics that you would want to engage about?
Yeah. Well, I always want to know what books have influenced somebody. So I'm a huge book nerd, and so I would love to know what books have influenced Mehmet the most, and then also would love to know more about just his coaching practice, who he coaches, what his kind of structure around coaching looks like. I think one of the beautiful things that I love about coaching is there are right and wrongs. There's a lot of science around coaching of do this, don't do this, those kinds of things, specifically around ethical and professional standards. But then there's also so much space where coaching is such an art, and there's so much space to be creative, and everybody coaches differently. So I would love to get a sense for who Mehmet is as a coach, because I'm endlessly fascinated with just the different ways that different coaches show up for their clients.
And Mehmet, what about for you?
Wes, what's the population in the town you live?
Yeah, so I'm right outside of Oklahoma City, but Oklahoma City is right around 600,000 people total. Yeah.
So it's not that small. What I was just talking to my wife earlier, and I just assumed, I apologize, I thought it was a little bit smaller. I just want to move to a smaller place, like a small town. I always lived in big cities, and I'm just tired of it. So I thought maybe you were living in a more less crowded space. I would ask you what it would look like, but I made a bad assumption. I apologize.
It's actually not a bad assumption. So there's this guy from New York, a journalist from New York, started covering the Oklahoma City Thunder, our professional basketball team, and he became really fascinated with Oklahoma City because it is a weird place. And he wrote a book called Boomtown. So if you want to know more about Oklahoma City, read Boomtown. It's awesome. But what's really funny is in that book, he kind of personifies Oklahoma City as the city that tries to pretend like it's bigger than it is. So, which is completely true. And so we have over 600,000 people, but actually just in terms of square footage, it's the largest city in the United States, if not in the world, because back in the early 1900s, the city planners began just buying up space after space after space because they really thought, hey, we're New York City, we need all this land because the city's just going to explode. And so population is large, but population density is pretty low, actually.
So you could feel like you're living in a small town. So see,
sure.
when you go to visit Wes in Oklahoma, then you'll get the full experience.
Yeah, right outside of my neighborhood is a big horse farm, so we'll go see some horses.
And then Wes, when you go to, you go visit Mehmet and you get to do some sailing. So there you go. Look at that. Both of you expanded. Because both of you also mentioned that this, the idea of developing emotionally, right? I'm curious, what was your emotion at the beginning of this podcast and what is your emotion now?
You're asking me to pull out my color chart.
Are you feeling blue or red?
And now I feel green. I'll let you interpret what that actually means.
You said pink and then green?
Yeah, I would say, I'm an over analyzer. And so I've thought about this podcast way too much leading up. And I had like some ideas in mind of how it would go. And so now I'm feeling just more expansive, more open. So those aren't exactly emotions, but I came in feeling pretty narrow and focused. And I feel more expansive and open to possibilities, which is, I'm trying to live in that space more often. So this was a great conversation.
I'll accept that. Thank you. Mehmet?
Yeah, I wanted to be better prepared for this podcast, but I didn't know what to prepare for. I mean, I'm like, I can list down some of my stories, but I'm like, which story am I going to tell? So, I'm like, let's be open to outcome. Let's see what's going to come up. And so I actually felt pretty good, pretty relaxed coming into this. And I feel pretty warm right now, just making a connection, a new person, and just hanging out with you, Valerie. I don't think I've seen you since January. So that was nice to see you too. So yeah, I feel pretty warm.
That's awesome. And I feel so much more positive because I think not much more positive. I was feeling positive already because I knew that this would be a nice match. And I think at some point when we were talking about all the coaching and I was like, oh, this conversation is going to get a little dense, I think, if we're just talking about coaching. Like I really wanted to pull out some of the warmth. So I'm so happy that we started talking about your fatherhood. And then from there, being a husband, I'm like, yes, this, right? So this also is an experience to teach me, things need to also cook a little bit sometimes before you get to the right, you get the right temperature and all that, the flavors start to come together. And that was kind of the experience. So I definitely feel hopeful. I'm so grateful to the two of you. You really did, the finished product, if you will, as we're putting it all together, is so pleasing to me to see two people, two men, actually, I want to say that just two men who are such huge hearts, the two of you, not only generously giving to others, but also understanding where you need to continue to have grace for yourselves, right? Where you need to continue to invest and nurture your own souls. And it was so evident in everything you shared, the examples and the commitments that you both have. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to interact with the two of you, not only one-on-one, but also to bring you guys together. So thank you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Any final words?
Muchas gracias, Valerie. Thank you.
De nada. I don't remember how to say thank you in Turkish. Tell me again.
Teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler.
Very good.
Thank you. And Wes, any final words?
No, loved it.
Period.
Period.
Perfect. Well, for those of you who tuned into this episode, thank you all so much for tuning in, for listening to us. Make sure that you subscribe so you do not miss this episode or any others in your inbox, and tune in for the next installment of Not Quite Strangers. Mehmet and Wes, thank you both again so very much. It was a pleasure to have you both on the program.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.